Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week, Congress admits they screwed up the 2018 Farm Bill, but put off a full federal ban on THC-infused hemp for another year. And this is the first week of the annual California State Fair, where that state celebrates 50 years since decriminalization at the Cannabis Experience. While in Ventura County, Glass House Farms gets raided by Immigration and Customs enforcers, and ICE arrests 200 allegedly illegal workers at the licensed legal cannabis and vegetable farm in Camarillo. And a Rhode Island medical MJ company has been working with the FDA on federal medical research for years until the DEA got involved. Now, MMJ International Holdings is calling for the firing of a DEA administrator who's trying to shut down that research. We have an exclusive interview with their CEO.
If the FDA approves our product, which I believe they will for Huntington's disease, I'll need 1 million square feet of growing specific strain marijuana to fill the gel caps. And that's what they don't want to happen.
All that and a story about 710 and how that pseudo-holiday of sorts for cannabis oil allows dispensaries another reason for sales and special events. All that and international state cannabis reports from coast to coast on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto. Next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly production documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in the United States and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto. Subscribe to the app by scanning the QR code on the screen or go to the App Store or Google Play. When you search, make sure there's a space between PCM and TV. All right, Pro Cannabis Media is rebranding to WPCM TV, and now WPCMTV.com takes you right to the old Pro Cannabis Media website during our transition. The full rebrand will take some time, but we will continue to produce our weekly news show. So let's get going. We start our show every week with an update on federal reform. And since there is nothing but crickets coming out of Washington, D.C. as far as cannabis reform is concerned, the federal battle now is over hemp. It's the same cannabis sativa plant that was defined legal as a product if it tested at 0.3% of THC at dry weight. That was the results of the 2018 Farm Bill that Senator Mitch McConnell helped to get passed. The legal loophole that was created in that bill has led to the growth of the unregulated billion-dollar hemp industry, including intoxicating hemp products. And now McConnell admits he screwed up. This week, McConnell said, quote, "My 2018 hemp bill sought to create an agricultural hemp industry, not open the door to the sale of unregulated, intoxicating, lab-made hemp-derived substances with no safety framework." This week, the Senate Appropriations Committee passed the 2026 budget for the Agriculture, Rural Development, FDA, and Related Agencies Act. That appropriations bill was originally submitted by Maryland Congressman Andy Harris, who pushed for the new regulations to be adopted. Now, the burden of just how much THC, the intoxicating cannabinoid that gets you high, can be in the hemp plant will be in the hands of RFK Jr.'s Health and Human Services Department. Right now, the wording of this new bill includes the vague definition of hemp with a limit of a quantifiable amount of THC. We get reaction from that industry in our hemp report with Kerry Hinkle.
Hey everyone, this is Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I am back again with another hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, in the second week of July, we have seen yet another attempt at a ban at the federal level on the hemp industry. As reported in past weeks, the House has considered language from Chairman Andy Harris out of Maryland that would redefine the definition of hemp in the 2018 Farm Bill to include that no products can contain any quantifiable amounts of THC. And this past week, we saw the similar effort happen on the Senate side in the same Senate Agriculture Appropriations Bill. This time, and maybe most concerningly for the hemp industry, it has come by a longtime former champion of the hemp industry and Senator Mitch McConnell from my home state of Kentucky. And what's really concerning about what Mitch McConnell has been doing is that, many in Congress point to him as a champion from the 2018 version of the Farm Bill that has led to both the agriculture and consumable goods products that have spurred into a $28 billion industry. And what Senator McConnell has done this week is added very similar language to what Chairman Harris has in his House version of the bill. Now, there are a few key differences which are saving graces for now for the hemp industry. And maybe most importantly, what was mentioned in the committee hearing is that if this bill were to become law, that there would be a 1-year delay from the effective date of the bill to when the new version of the definition of hemp would become implemented. Now, there's also a few kind of inside baseball tricks to this as well, in that the Senate and House agriculture appropriations bills have not passed on their own in over a decade for large reasons outside of anything to do with hemp, cuts to SNAP and other things that we don't really concern ourselves with on this program. And so, while very unlikely that either version will end up on the president's desk as is, what can happen is a skinny or slimmed down CR or continuing resolution would happen at the end of September, and also maybe a larger package would happen at the end of the year. And these are important funding mechanisms for the food and agriculture community in the United States. And so it's important to keep these bills and funding mechanisms going. And usually what happens in the continuing resolution is that they take everything they deem that is non-controversial and throw it in the CR, sign it, and keep this thing moving. And because there are slight differences now between the House and the Senate version of the new definition of hemp, this could be the definition of non-controversial. And so they could hopefully then not add that into the CR. And so while it's a disappointing week this week to see backwards momentum at the federal level on hemp and cannabis laws, we are hopeful that the differing opinions between the two versions and the year moratorium and champions like Senator Merkley, who spoke up at the hearing saying that we have a year to get this right, will allow for some tweaks to prevent a full outright ban, because this language does ban products like full spectrum CBD as well. So tough week, but again, we've got a lot to look forward to continue to fight this long fight. So again, I'm Kerry Hinkle with Cannabis Coast to Coast News, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, so the federal government gets a mulligan for the 2018 Farm Bill with the passing of the new version for 2026, and now gives the hemp industry 1 year to comply before testing and enforcement can begin. Of course, it is now the duty of the Health and Human Services Department to interpret what a quantifiable amount of THC will be allowed in the hemp plant. And this might be a good time for someone to explain to lawmakers that the entourage effect is and how THC interacts with all the other minor cannabinoids in the plant, including CBD. But in the meantime, the DEA released their quarterly report this week on that rescheduling process. The report is a requirement by DEA Administrative Judge John Mulrooney, who put this whole rescheduling process on hold in January. The president's nominee to lead the DEA, Terrence Cole, still has not been confirmed by Congress to head up that department. Right now, Robert Murphy is the interim leader of the DEA. However, with no permanent leadership in place, much of the enforcement responsibilities are falling to deputies. One is Deputy Administrator Thomas Provoznik, who heads up a group called the Diversion Control Division. And now, a medical pharmaceutical company in Rhode Island called MMJ Biopharma is calling for Provoznik to be fired and the DEA to be overhauled. Over the past 7 years, that company has worked directly with the FDA in Washington, D.C., assuring compliance for their medical research on Huntington's disease and multiple sclerosis. MMJ International Holdings, the parent company of MMJ Biopharma, put out a news release this week asking for Provoznik to be fired because of the DEA's, quote, bureaucratic incompetence and systemic negligence bordering on malpractice. Duane Boise is the CEO of that company, and he talked with the executive producer of this news show, Jimmy Young, this week.
Thanks, Alaina. Joining me now is Duane Boise. He is the CEO of MMJ International Holdings, a company that has three different companies under it. Duane, thank you so much for joining us, and tell us a little bit about why this has been such a frustrating process for you, what you've gone through, because it sounds like you've done all the right things working with the FDA, trying to get a compliant medical product to market, and now the DEA is blocking that effort, correct?
Jimmy, a pleasure to meet you. Thanks for having me on the show.
You bet.
Cut to the chase. Three companies, as you stated.
Yeah.
MMJ International Holdings is the study company. We filed two investigational new drug applications with the Food and Drug Administration in late 17-18. And the second company, MMJ Biopharma Cultivation, applied to the Drug Enforcement Administration in 2018 to grow strain-specific cannabis in our formulation. And MMJ Biopharma Labs was the analytical lab, Schedule I license holder from the DEA, to do the analytics for the formulation to create the medicine.
Right.
So
And
all three integrated to one goal of creating the medicine to facilitate the clinical trials.
for Huntington's disease and for
Multiple sclerosis,
right?
primary
Okay.
progressive, right?
And I want to point out that you started this effort when cannabis was it still is a Schedule One, but it was even before the Farm Bill in 2018. If it was, am I right on that?
That's correct.
So
Yeah.
this isn't a hemp versus marijuana thing or MJ thing. This is a Schedule One substance that you were trying to do clinical trials, and you were working with the FDA on this, correct?
Right. I just want to be clear here.
Yep.
I am an advocate,
Yep.
and what I say shouldn't be taken out of context. I understand the legal aspects of what we're doing, but we made a determination early on that the only way to do it federally legal as a Schedule One, we don't care if it reschedules or legalizes or any of that, it makes no matter to us, is to do it the way the laws were on the books at the time.
Right.
And that's what we did.
Right. And then we got to a point where you went through the whole process. You were working with the FDA. They gave you some approvals at some point to keep you going. Yes.
In the Huntington's study, they gave us a orphan designation, which is significant. It took a lot of work for the team to get there. And what that does is give us a de facto patent for 7 years on the approved final dose medicine.
Yeah.
And it gives us $1 million or $2 million to offset some of the expense of the clinical trials. And but we decided to go that way versus filing all these patents, because the government actually defends our patent once the medicine is approved. Once that medicine is approved, also, I'll make a note that we would force the DEA to take it from a Schedule One to maybe a 3 or a 4.
Yeah.
As a result of the approval. Yeah.
Right. And then what happened? How did we get to the point where you guys finally said, you know what? The DEA is incompetent. I think that was one of the words you used, right? Negligence, incompetence. And to me, it's a lesson I've learned. The government's very good at creating delays for any progress, it seems to be. And you're right in the middle of it.
I come from a law enforcement family, so maybe I'm naive here, and as it turns out, I probably was, to think that they were operating in good faith, because all the roadblocks they were putting in front of us just didn't make any sense. So I could go all the way back to the initial investigation when they came out to inspect the security systems and the vault. I had a 10 by 20 DEA approved vault in the building. And this particular investigator, Tom Cook out of Providence, came out, and he looked like the refrigerator repairman bending over on the floor. And he went down to the town hall and looked at the concrete on the base of the vault and determined that the concrete wasn't deep enough with rebar because of what the first architectural plans were for the building. He forced us, instead of putting, the law says you would have to dig it out and comply, or you could put electronic sensors there. The theory is if somebody's going to blow the bottom floor of the vault, it would set off alarms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tom Cook makes us dig up the whole floor of the vault, report to the specifics, redo the rebar. And every time he was on the phone telling me what to do, I said, but Tom, the reg says, and you can use electronic devices, he goes back and reads the first line and would never acknowledge what I was saying to him.
That whole interview with Duane Boise and Jimmy Young will be released on Thursday of this week. One of the things that has happened during the DEA rescheduling delays is that state testing labs are coming under fire. 18 legal states have recalled tested products with fraudulent results. This puts the public at risk when those contaminated products reach the shelves at legal adult use dispensaries. 2 weeks ago in Massachusetts, the Cannabis Control Commission shut down assured testing labs after a series of false reports and a whole slew of violations. Assured Testing Labs is now fighting the CCC's suspension in court with a lawsuit claiming they did nothing wrong and was just following the testing rules for the state. We'll have more on the challenges of testing labs later in the show. But now let's check in with Tina Tasaka, who has the story of the next adult use state to open their doors in Minnesota. But now that state has given an Indigenous tribe their right to open a store outside of their jurisdiction. Here's Tina.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. On July 2nd, the White Earth Nation opened its second off-reservation recreational cannabis dispensary, Wobigwan Mesquite in St. Cloud, Minnesota, which drew a bustling crowd even before its 10 a.m. ribbon cutting. Zach Wilson, Tribal Cannabis CEO, praised the historic Tribal State Compact signed by Governor Tim Walz in late May, which permits up to 8 dispensaries statewide. Earlier, on May 23rd, the tribe debuted its first off-reservation shop in Moorhead, parts of their strategy to bring seed to sale, grown and made cannabis to more communities. Tribal Chair Michael Fairbanks emphasized the dispensaries as vital for serving users focused on wellness and reinforcing strong tribal sovereignty. The excitement was palpable. Customers and bud tenders alike thrilled to mark Minnesota's next big step in legal cannabis expansion. Legislation season is a wrap in Nevada, and here's the rundown pertaining to the new Assembly and Senate bills that impact the Cannabis Compliance Board, CCB. I will just summarize a few of the highlights. Senate Bill 25, effective now, authorizes state fire marshal to enforce cannabis production facility regulations. Assembly Bill 76, effective upon passage, CCB-sponsored bill with administrative fixes, including compliant process updates, hemp regulation studies, cannabis tax reviews, and changes to holds, testing, packaging, and labeling. Workshops are being planned for August. Assembly Bill 504, effective October 1, targets unlicensed hemp sales with signage, requirements, and bans misleading statements. CCB enforcement to develop regulations with investigations referred to the Attorney General. Senate Bill 157, effective October 1, requires CCB regulations for cannabis testing, specifying lot sizes, 5 to 15 pounds, and sample sizes, 10 grams, aligning with ASM standards via workshops. In total, there were 6 bills having impact. That's it for the Nevada highlights and Tribal Nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That will do it for the A Block, our first section of Cannabis Coast to Coast News this week. Next, we check out the celebration of 50 years of decriminalization in the Golden State of California, where the California State Fair is embracing the legal market with a designed cannabis experience. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
Counting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the B Block, and I'm Alaina Pinto. First up, the Golden State of California. 50 years ago, that state was the first to decriminalize cannabis possession crimes and start their medical program. And now the California State Fair is celebrating the cannabis culture. They call it the Cannabis Experience, and 4 years ago it started, and last year it was such a draw and success that fair organizers decided to embrace the whole experience and increase the space to 50,000 square feet. Embark is the licensed dispensary on site that can sell and host a designated area for consumption. There is also a grow competition, educational sessions, contests, and hundreds of vendors. But needless to say, advocates are ecstatic that the culture and the product are allowed for enjoyment there, and this is a big step towards normalcy. Unfortunately, not all good news in California this week. The controversial increase in excise tax still needs to be repealed, and immigration officials raided a legal grow facility called Grass House Farms and arrested over 200 people. Here's Dina Naguib in California.
I'm Dina Naguib, Principal Consultant at Grass Goddess Consulting, here to give you the latest news from California for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. We've had some big news in California the past few weeks regarding the excise tax, and as of July 1st, the excise tax increased to 19% in the state. This was a devastating blow after so many in the industry fought hard to try and get the increase blocked. Unfortunately, those efforts were unsuccessful. But the good news is the bill that I've been talking about, AB 564, is still in play. And this week we received good news from the Senate where the bill passed the Revenue and Taxation Committee. If the bill passes one more committee, a Senate vote, and receives the governor's signature, come October, we could see the excise tax drop back down to 15%. Supporters are optimistic and see this week's committee vote as a positive sign. In other California news, Glass House Farms had its two main cultivation sites raided on Thursday, where federal warrants were served, and then the National Guard and ICE entered the properties. There were ICE protesters, which resulted in tear gas and rubber pellets being used to try and break up the crowd. Reports were that someone in the crowd fired a gun during the chaotic interaction. In addition, many workers were rounded up by ICE, and reports are that there were several undocumented minors who were allegedly working on the farms. This story is still developing, and we will learn more soon, I'm sure. That's it for California news this week. I'm Dina Naguib from Grass Goddess Consulting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
One more note on that raid by ICE. A worker at the facility was avoiding the confrontation between the federal agents and a number of protesters and had escaped to the roof of the building. Jamie Alanis was a worker at the farm that grows produce in addition to cannabis, and Alanis tragically fell off that roof and died the next day. There were 4 arrests of protesters who were there when ICE arrived. The protesters got in the face of the federal agents, and a confrontation ensued that led to the arrests. No confrontation or raids in Michigan, but that state continues to see declining total sales while the number of total products sold continues to rise. One place Michiganders won't be buying from anymore in that state is multi-state operator TerrAscend. Over the past few weeks, that company closed its operation in Michigan and is leaving the state. As Amy Carter tells us, no one is upset to see an MSO leave the state since her state celebrates the craft grower and the small businessman. Here's Amy in Michigan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters, and welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Let's jump right in. Michigan's weed market is experiencing its first real slump since legalization. Adult use cannabis sales have dipped year over year for 4 consecutive months. While dispensaries are still moving more product than ever, Falling prices and an oversupply are affecting profits and tax income. The average price per ounce, a wallet-friendly $63. Regulator warning: Michigan's leading cannabis regulator is pushing for stronger enforcement powers. They want the ability to immediately suspend the licenses of businesses that break rules, aiming to tackle that pesky oversupply. Plus, new cap on cultivation facilities might be on the horizon. Exciting news: a powerful coalition is banding together for Lobby Day in Lansing, Michigan. Join forces with the Michigan Weedsters, Americans for Safe Access Michigan, the Democratic and Republican Cannabis Caucuses, and Michigan NORML as we unite to oppose House Bill 4391. The date is Thursday, July 17th, and the location is Lansing, 9 a.m. Let's make our voices heard. Together, we can protect our rights and say no to roadside saliva testing. Don't miss this chance to meet your senators and advocate for what you believe in. That's a wrap for this week. I'm Amy Carter. We'll see you next time.
A year ago, reputable polling company Pew Research conducted a survey and poll of adults over the age of 21. That old survey concluded that over 68% of adults want to see the plant medicine legalized. This time, the same research firm conducted another survey, and now that number has increased to 87% who want to see the plant decriminalized. That's almost 9 out of 10 people surveyed. The percentage of adults who want to see all adults have access to legal weed is 54%, but the other group that has accepted its medicinal value increased to 33%, bringing that total to its highest point yet, a total of 87%. One state that continues to prepare for an adult use market is the state of Virginia, where the outgoing prohibitionist Governor Glenn Youngkin is gone at the end of this year. We know Joe Parsons is counting the days, and now he has our Virginia report.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The Joint Commission to oversee the transition of the Commonwealth into a retail market held an in-person and open to the public meeting at the General Assembly building on July 9th at 1 p.m. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss Virginia's eventual introduction into the retail market that was promised to begin by 2024. With the governor's race getting underway, the committee wants input from the public and businesses on ways to make the transition as smooth and as profitable as possible. Last week on Coffee Talk, I had the president and founder of Patients at a Time as our guest. Mary Lynn Mathery, a retired naval nurse, founded Patients at a Time, a nonprofit organization, in 1995 as a way not only to get the general public educated on the medicinal values of cannabis, but to also educate doctors and nurses and help them accept the proven science that cannabis was not the harmful poison that the big pharmaceutical companies would have them to believe it was. Patients at a Time is celebrating their 30th anniversary in September and is hosting the 16th National Clinical Conference on Cannabis Therapeutics in Charlottesville at the Forum Hotel, September 14th through the 16th. Here's a segment from our interview after the show about her organization and the upcoming event. What exactly does Patients Out of Time do?
Well, Patients Out of Time, as its name speaks, we're very concerned that patients need cannabis medicine now. So we were formed to basically educate healthcare professionals and the general public about the endocannabinoid system, and the therapeutic use of cannabis so that they understand how to use it safely and effectively.
There'll be a conference coming up. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we're celebrating our 30th anniversary, and on our website you'll see the podcast of Road to 30. So we're interviewing a lot of people who've helped us over the years. This year we'll be hosting the 16th National Clinical Conference on Cannabis Therapeutics. It's going to be held in Charlottesville, Virginia, at the Forum Hotel, September 14th to the 16th.
Well, that's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WV in Charlottesville, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
What's up, everybody? I'm Mark Allen, the Chicago Clone Guy, tuning in from just outside Chicago, Illinois for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Thanks again for tuning in. This is Bird. He's got the lion cut going on for this summer. Buzz him down. I don't know if you can see him up there, but he is buzzed. He's feeling good. I have great news to report. Illinois, or at least for the city of Chicago, has came out publicly and stated that even though the law states that their police are allowed to search vehicles based solely off the odor of burnt or raw cannabis, the city of Chicago has come out publicly and said that they will not be searching vehicles solely based off the odor of raw or burnt cannabis. Simply put, they don't want to deal with it. I don't think they want to throw people in jail with it. They don't want to have all the problems and the lawyers and the legal fees. So they straight up said, unless there's foul play or something suspicious with the people, like super duper suspicious, like they think something super criminal's going on, like they're going to let it go. They don't even want to deal with it. So that's pretty awesome. The city of Chicago has about 2.8 million people that live in it, and it's actually declining. But normally Chicago does everything wrong. So I'm actually happy to report that they're doing something right this time. Well done, Chicago. Now, on the other hand, with the good, there's normally the bad. Bad news is that some of the medical patients have been getting affected by the new metric system that's been recently placed into the dispensaries. Simply put, medical patients are reporting that the allowed allotments that they are allowed, like per week, per month, have been incorrect. So supposedly, allegedly, the new system is throwing off people's totals and not allowing medical patients to get sometimes the amount of medical product that they need. So I'm not hearing it on a large scale, but you know, there's normally growing pains with anything. So hopefully they can fix it or figure it out and move on from it. But that sums up the news for Chicago land, Illinois. I'm Chicago Clone Guy. Thanks for tuning in to Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The race to become the 25th legal adult use state continues, and all indications it will be Pennsylvania. This week, a new bipartisan bill was introduced to pave the way for a new adult use market. One of the key factors is that it will allow the already existing medical licensees to stay open for adult sales. The same thing is happening in Oklahoma, where a ballot initiative is shaping up to approve adult use to that already existing medical program. Here's Kimmy Cannabis in Oklahoma with more.
I am Kimmy Cannabis from Can I Talk About It with the Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Breaking update, State Question 837 is officially moving forward. We are set to begin signature gathering on August 6, 2025, and we'll have until 5 p.m. on November 4th to collect enough valid signatures to qualify for the November 2026 ballot. Now, here's what SQ 837 is about and why it matters. It's a proposed constitutional amendment that would legalize adult use cannabis in Oklahoma for adults 21 and older. If passed, it would allow individuals to legally possess up to 12 homegrown marijuana plants, 72 ounces of edibles, and 8 ounces of commercial marijuana. It also includes strong legal protections. People on probation, parole, or pretrial release could not be penalized for cannabis use. Law enforcement would be prohibited from assuming impairment based solely on cannabis consumption. And it would protect the consumers from being denied housing or employment due to marijuana use. SQ 837 would also change how cannabis is taxed, removing the current 7% excise tax on medical marijuana and introducing a 10% excise tax on adult use sales. Revenue would support state, county, and municipal budgets. If federal legalization happens, it would even allow Oklahoma to export cannabis with a 3% export tax applied. Here's why this moment is so critical. SQ 837 went unchallenged after it was filed, just before Governor Stitt signed Senate Bill 1027 in May 2025. That new law drastically tightens the initiative petition process. The fact that SQ 837 cleared the path before those new rules took effect makes this signature drive one of the most important in Oklahoma's cannabis movement. That's it for the Oklahoma Cannabis Report. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott is preparing his legislature for their special session starting on July 21st, where the future of the hemp industry will be discussed. You might remember that Governor Abbott vetoed the first hemp ban bill he was handed by his legislature last month, and now he just wants his state legislators to hand him a bill that regulates intoxicating hemp products like alcohol. In the meantime, the city of Dallas recriminalized possession crimes inside the borders of their city after voters passed a ballot question that decriminalized the plant last November. Now let's check with Curtis Emery here in Massachusetts with his Bay State report.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Massachusetts operators are ditching their licenses at the highest rate yet. As of May this year, 23 operators have either surrendered or allowed their licenses to lapse. Of those 23 operators, 4 retail locations closed completely, the total number of retail closures in the year 2024 alone. Operators are pointing towards the strict tax law in Massachusetts, specifically community impact fees, which have caused some operators to go into some serious debt. While many operators own more than one license, this is obviously representing a new problem in mass cannabis, which will continue to affect operators as time goes on. A continuing story here in Massachusetts. On June 30th, the CCC issued a summary suspension order against Assured Testing Laboratories, an independent testing laboratory here in the state. The order claims that Assured has been misrepresenting their results, specifically when it comes to mold and yeast counts in their samples. According to the state, Assured testing samples fail at a rate 90% higher than those of other testing laboratories in the state. According to Assured, they've been working with the state to try to tighten up their process. Assured has now filed a complaint with the Suffolk County Superior Court. This complaint was filed on July 3rd, a day before the state had ordered Assured cease all operations. Assured's complaint, they were not given due process or a chance to defend themselves and explain the situation. And on top of that, they claim that they've been working with the state to try to tighten up their standards, which was misrepresented in the suspension order. The CCC is cracking down on such bad actors to maintain the trust in the community and the safety for consumers in the state. Should be interesting to see how this story develops as time goes on. Until then, I've been Curtis Emery.
It's time to turn to our friends across the pond. This is our international cannabis report. There's another European nation moving towards decriminalization. This week, the Czech Republic cleared the way to legalize possession and gave citizens the green light to grow 3 plants at home. The governing body there has put in place possession limits, and this happens at home and in the public. Czech citizens will be allowed to have just over 3 ounces at home for a limit of 100 grams and 25 grams in public. Now let's check in with Dave Barton in the UK.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermidor with your UK cannabis report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The world's largest organic medical cannabis deal, worth £7 million, will see closer bonds built between New Zealand producers and the UK medical market. The deal between Kiwi company Puro and IPS Pharma in the UK was inked at the New Zealand High Commission in London last month and was reported during Cannabis Europa. Medical cannabis, good for sleep? That's a question many insomniacs here in Britain are asking. While the answer seems somewhat obvious, a lack of clinical research has kept evidence purely anecdotal until now. A new study, which saw 20 insomnia sufferers try medical cannabis, found that a single oral dose decreased total sleep time and time spent in REM sleep, without any observable change in alertness the next day. While more research is needed, given how common it is, could insomnia be the breakthrough qualifying condition for medical cannabis to increase patient numbers here in Britain? That's all for this week's UK report. I'm Dave Barton from Thermidor reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
This is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. Over the last 2 weeks, we've had, obviously, heat, but we've had more events, and that's something that obviously I love to be able to be part of. But with the summer coming, many brands and many LPs are coming together to create things that are going to be serving the community as well as the industry, such as the Higher Collective launch at Club Lit in Toronto, Ontario. This launch is going to be a collective based on the lack of exclusion. I don't want to say the lack of, the exclusion of women that do suffer from some sort of disability. With the Higher B Collective, it is aiming to change the aspect that many individuals have when it comes to disability by mentoring and gaining access and sharing that access internationally with the community building. Many of the women and visionaries and distributors have been facing this scrutiny, and we all know that. This is something that we all try to obviously change, but obviously doesn't always happen. But when it comes to the Higher Collective and the backing of Jane Doe, this Ontario launch of the new mentorship program is not only going to be bringing something new to the table, but be creating new opportunities for women that do want to be part of this industry, but have not given the amazing chance to be able to do so. So I will be attending that. I will also be making sure that we have great footage. And when it comes to Canada and our news, that's it. So this is Debbie Facey with the Canadian Coast to Coast Cannabis News Report. Peace.
That'll do it for the B block, but we have one more section to go this week. You will definitely want to stay tuned to hear about the origins of the oil day, or 7 to 10. Plus, an interesting research report was released this week that concludes that testing of cannabis concentrates are far more accurate than testing for live flower. We have an interview with the researcher from Bud and Mary's in Colorado when Cannabis Coast to Coast news continues after this.
That's the active form.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discovered that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. Get some medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which, at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings. Right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is the C block, or the final section of our show this week. I'm Alaina Pinto. Here's a final reminder to download the PCM TV app from the Google Play or App Store. It's free. And yes, you can scan the QR code on the screen and that will take you right there. So you won't even have to remember to put the space between the PCM and the TV when you search. The cannabis industry has been holding its breath halfway through 2025. A survival has become the focus, not making profits. In fact, there have been quite a few multi-state operators who are cutting their losses and shutting down their operations in states that just haven't been able to make it. For instance, TerraSend is leaving Michigan, and Forefront Ventures is going into receivership. Needless to say, the question is, has the market plateaued? In medical-only states like Florida, MSOs like Curaleaf are shutting down their medical-only operations and opening hemp stores. This is an industry with thin profit margins because of the over-regulated compliance rules. Combined with unfair federal tax rules like 280E, it's a real challenge to keep the doors open. Many operators who have borrowed money to stay afloat are dealing with overly inflated interest loans. It makes no sense to investors or operators to stay bullish on the future. Many are publicly traded on the Canadian Stock Exchange, but with federal rescheduling on hold, licenses being revoked, and smaller operations just not able to sustain a business in the most highly regulated industry in history. Many of the legal states with sales revenues growing, but with prices falling because of a lack of demand. It's a perfect storm for disaster. So what impact has this had on Wall Street? Let's find out from our guy who is high on Wall Street, Doug Miller. He looks at TerrAscend this week.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. MSO TerrAscend Corp has locked in $79 million in fresh debt financing as it officially exits the Michigan market. The company revealed that $69 million of the funding was used to retire existing debt, with the remaining $10 million set aside for future growth and M&A opportunities. The loan, led by New York-based Focus Growth Asset Management, carries a 12.75% interest rate and matures in August of 2028. TerrAscend's executive chair, Jason Wild, said the deal extends most of their debt until late 2028 and gives the company more fuel for expansion. Wild added the move shows Focus Growth's strong belief in the company's long-term strategy. Earlier this month, TerrAscend announced it is exiting Michigan after full operational review. The company's unloading all assets in the state, including 20 dispensaries and 4 grow facilities, assets it aggressively acquired during its 2021-2022 expansion spree. TerrAscend trades as TSND on the Toronto Stock Exchange. So let's see how the stock chart looks. It's trading around 38 cents, and it's looking pretty good to continue to curl up. I would watch for any pullback and be sure to trade smart and lock in those profits. That is this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
One of the most well-known brands that operates in many states and 5 countries is Cookies, founded in 2010 by the rapper Burner and his San Francisco-based grower Jay, also known as the Cannabis Whisperer. Cookies opened its newest dispensary in the shadow of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. this week. According to reports, the opening was a tad underwhelming, but bringing the iconic brand to D.C. has significance for their CEO, James Caan, whose family has its roots in the District of Columbia. Did you know that area has the second highest consumption rate in the country? According to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, D.C. is only behind Vermont and early adopters Colorado and Oregon. A relatively new state of Maryland is growing its market, and that's where the enlightened one, Christopher Bright, reports from this week.
I'm Christopher Bright from The Enlightened Voice. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'll be bringing you the latest cannabis headlines from Maryland. Maryland Governor Wes Moore has announced a new search for a location for the state's $7 million cannabis incubator project after local opposition to its site at the William J. Witt Armory in Catonsville. The decision follows concerns from residents about the site's proximity to homes, a school, a temple, and a daycare. A petition by Catonsville residents Josh Jackson highlighted issues like security, job orders, and traffic. Moore has directed state agencies to find a new site away from residential areas, emphasizing community engagement. The incubator, a first of its kind in the U.S., aims to support up to 110 cannabis microbusinesses. Maryland's cannabis industry has already generated over $480 million in sales. And now we have our content creator of the week. I would like to shine the spotlight on Stoner K-God. His journey has taken him from Pennsylvania to Washington in pursuit of his dreams of content creation around cannabis. From his hilarious blinker videos to his informative strain reviews with his lady, Treasy710, they are a gem to the cannabis community. Make sure to follow him on IG at Stoner K-God and his YouTube channel at The Stoners710. That's all for this week's Maryland Cannabis Report. I'm Christopher Bright from the Enlightened Voice, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Thanks, Alaina. You're right. I got so excited when I read the little item about this research study because it was all done by MedPharm Holdings LLC. And I said, I think that's the Bud and Mary's brand, which I'm very familiar with after meeting everybody at MJ Unpacked about a month ago. And that includes you, Dr. Duncan Mackey, because you're involved with the research that was just released, correct?
That's correct, Jimmy. That was all the analytical work was actually done in our lab.
And the results were fascinating to me because anything new and different in this industry, I love. I'm like a sponge. So explain again the results that you found out that the testing in concentrates, which is really the highest percentage of THC in cannabis products, is far more consistent in testing than testing for flower and that THC percentage, which anybody who follows this industry knows. Between the hemp side and the MJ side, there's all sorts of issues with testing labs and frauds going on and bribes and all this. So walk me through how you guys did this research and the conclusions you came up with.
So Jimmy, we a few years ago recognized that issue, right? And in collaboration with the University of Colorado at Boulder, a collaborator, Dr. Bidwell, our lab, we put together some funding grants and we're able to get funded to ask that fundamental question. How accurate is flower? And also how accurate are concentrates? And concentrates, I love to lead with the positive, right? And so the positive is that going to be that high THC concentrates are really accurate. We're 96+% accuracy. And that, at least people know what they're getting themselves into when they go to dab or they take a vaporizer device. On the flip side, there's also going to be the side that is the flower. And that's where we see something around 56%. And I'll tell you, I wasn't all that surprised. I've often told people it's probably a flip of a coin. And that's because just the heterogeneity of the plant. It's a living thing, right? And so testing for something that is a living organism and having it be consistent from plant to plant or even within the plant, it's going to have its own difficulties with it, right?
Right.
We will be releasing that entire interview with Duncan Mackey next week on Thursday. Many cannabis consumers are familiar with the date and the number 420. Some may even know of its origins in San Rafael, California. But what about 710? Or in this case, July 10th? That is a second day on the weed calendar that many consumers recognize and dispensaries use for another reason, to use specials and events to drive revenue and attention. This week, executive producer Jimmy Young visited his local dispensary in Clinton, Massachusetts.
Clinton, Massachusetts is a sleepy old mill town in New England that's enjoying a revitalization of sorts. No, not just because I moved there in 2022, but this is a place where you can actually get a beautiful water view of a pond at the base of the Wachusett Dam. I get to look at it every day. That dam was built in the 19th century to create the reservoir that provides water for 53 cities and towns in eastern Massachusetts and over 2.7 million people. It is also home to New England Harvest, a dual medical and adult use dispensary that held a small 710 event in their parking lot this past week.
Dan from New England Harvest.
In our never-ending pursuit to educate and follow the cannabis industry and document the fight to end cannabis prohibition, we always like to enlighten our audience about things in the culture that they may not understand. For instance, did you know 710 upside down is oil, O-I-L, and that's how the oil day was adopted by the cannabis industry. Everything originates in California. 420 originated in California at San Rafael High School. I don't know if you know the story of the Waldos. You do? Okay. And they were friendly with, what was that band you were talking about?
The Grateful Dead.
It all comes down to the Grateful Dead in cannabis, So I guess, Mike, the question is 710 Highway, Oil Day, okay? Now I find out that there's been songs, rap songs about 710, and now that's being embraced, if you will, by the community, and more importantly, any excuse for pop-ups
and a little bit of a get-together with other brands. Tell me about Space Poppers, because this is your real chance. And if you really want to, you could talk about ACS, too.
Yeah, I actually get to work for wonderful people in this industry. I'm fortunate to have met Rodolfo and Chantel and Sarah, who created Space Poppers. We are an infused, one-of-a-kind product. It's infused popcorn. It comes in 10 and 100 milligram doses. We have sweet chili, sea salt caramel, and Chicago style cheese combo. ACS is out of Bridgewater. We just opened up our second retail store in Hull. We are both medical. There's a lot of quality and control of just good product coming out of there.
In Clinton, Massachusetts, I'm Jimmy Young reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And finally tonight, in case you hadn't heard, did you ever wonder what industry reports the most satisfied employees? It's not construction or trades, or even In-N-Out Burger, which claims their employees are the happiest in fast food. Nope, it's cannabis. According to the annual survey of worker satisfaction by the Shift Pulse report and the Workforce Platform Deputy, 9 out of 10 hourly workers in cannabis reported, quote, positive sentiment, unquote, in their jobs. The overall findings of the survey was that 78.5% of American workers are becoming less happy with their jobs, which is down from 80% the year before. So if you want to think about a career change, you might want to think about cannabis, especially when many benefits includes discounts on the product. That'll do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. We will see you next time, but don't forget, it's a whole new world of weed out there, so consume it responsibly.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCM TV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCM TV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amy Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean...
the quicker picker-upper! I love that!
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Alaina Pinto.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCM TV has racked up over 1.3 million views with 17 million impressions and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. Now we even have our own app. For more information, contact the team at WPCMTV.com.